The plan was for B Squadron to be loaded into 2 C-130s on the Ascension Isles. We would then fly across the South Atlantic to the Rio Grande Air Base on Tierra del Fuego, crash in on the runway and destroy all the aircraft. We'd disable Exocet missiles, kill all the pilots and the officers' mess, and then abandon the Hercules C-130 aeroplanes. We would then have to escape and evade to the Chilean border on foot, 40 or 50 odd miles away. It would be the biggest operation the SAS had carried out since the Second World War, but it would be a suicide mission. On the 2nd of April 1982, Argentina invaded the Falkland Islands. 3 SAS squadrons were deployed, each given a specific task. My squadron, B Squadron, began examining options to attack an airbase on mainland Argentina and to destroy the jets which were to threaten the task force. D Squadron were tasked to conduct classic SAS hit-and-run raids behind enemy lines on the Falklands. G Squadron were to form the reconnaissance team, gathering the intelligence urgently needed to help plan the recapture of the islands. In one of the most daring SAS operations of the war, 10 four-man patrols were covertly inserted onto the islands 3 full weeks before the British landings. They were on their own. The main British forces were still on the Ascension Isles, 3,500 miles away.
It was early hours of the morning when we left Hermes. The journey was about 150 miles and my patrol were landed by helicopter 20 odd miles away from our observation post. It took us about 5 nights to reach it over difficult and very exposed terrain. We had to take everything we would need to survive behind enemy lines for at least a month, and each man was carrying about 130 pounds of kit. A lot of the weight was made up by weapons and bullets. If it all went wrong, we weren't going to carry all that weight over 20 miles just to surrender. We were worried about minefields, but there was just no time to check for them. Being lead scout, I just wouldn't have had any idea if I was walking into one until it was too late. We'd be moving for most of the night, and before daybreak we'd make a slit trench and then disappear for the rest of the daylight. I remember once I was already in my sleeping bag, and usually when you're laying in a sleeping bag you're quite warm, but this sleeping bag was soaking wet. It was freezing cold, and I was dreaming that I was actually digging up a road with a pneumatic drill. I was actually shaking like that, and I woke myself up with the shaking. If it's dark, you can get up and do some press-ups or whatever to keep warm. But in the daylight, you've just got to wiggle your toes, wiggle your hands, and so on. Just tense yourself up every now and again so that you can get the blood flowing through the veins. Our feet were in pretty shit state. Some of us had trench foot, and I still haven't regained all the feeling in my toes. We were positioned above the Argentinian garrison and airbase at Goose Green, which posed one of the biggest threats to the proposed British beachhead at San Carlos. We were tasked to establish how many troops there were and assess the strength of the defences. We were building up a picture for the troops that would actually be taking out Goose Green. In order to get into the best position, it was necessary for us to set up our observation post under the main flight route for the Picaras, Chinooks and Hueys all flying around. So it was quite difficult sometimes lying in these shell scrapes when these aircraft were using this hilltop as a navigational aid. They came so low that sometimes you'd just be choking on the exhaust fumes. Nighttime was our busiest time. We'd send off our situation reports by Morse back to Hermes, where they were logging all the information that was sent to them from all of our 10 patrols, building the big picture. This was our most vulnerable time, as the enemy could well have intercepted our signal and pinpointed our position using a location finder. In this event, we had no hope of any backup. It would have been a fight to the death. Everything we saw, we passed back in our situation reports. We initially reported that we could see at least 600 Argentinian soldiers dug in, which is a battalion, although they were later reinforced. We could also see 8 Pucara ground attack aircraft as well as a fuel dump. We called in an airstrike on these targets, and it was spectacular to see it happen, watching the fuel dump blow up and just disintegrate in front of us. There was one time at night when we heard this Argentinian helicopter really loaded down with men flying from Port Stanley to reinforce Goose Green. It was flying so low and so slowly it would have been easy to shoot it out of the sky. But that would have risked giving away our position, and we couldn't take the risk. Our fight was with our eyes and ears.
The patrol moved out several nights before Tupar arrived to attack Darwin and Goose Green. By this time, reinforcements had swelled the Argentinian garrison to 1,300 men. Outnumbered 3-1, Tupara recaptured the settlement against overwhelming odds in one of the most bitterly fought battles of the war. While G Squadron continued to gather intelligence, my squadron was finalising plans for the attack on the airbase in Argentina. By the time we got to Ascension, we were fully committed to the Entebbe-type raid. All intelligence reports indicated that this was a high-risk operation. There was a lot of apprehension amongst the squadron members about this mission. When you join a force like the SAS, you know that you'll be used as tactical troops, used for difficult jobs, be used for the best jobs, and that's what we get paid for. If you don't like it, you can you're so hyped up and ready to go. You just want to do it. You want to get on with it. You want to do the job. And then you start to think, good old SAS common sense has taken over. I finally realised that this would have been a suicide mission. Instead of sending the entire squadron in the C-130, the new option was to send in an 8-man team by helicopter. They were to locate the airbase and destroy the aircraft themselves. They loaded into a stripped-down, long-range helicopter for the low-level dash to the mainland. If there was any problem with locating the drop-off point, they were to be flown onto the border with Chile and to conduct the mission from there. It was a one-way flight. The helicopter crew were briefed to ditch the chopper in Chile and initiate the explosives that had been packed into the chopper floor. As they approached the mainland, the handheld radar warning device suddenly began to ping, warning the patrol and the pilot that a hostile radar had locked on. It now pinged continuously. It was agreed that the mission should continue. They made an attempt to find the first drop-off position, nearly crashing into the side of a hill, until they found a valley where they could fly up undercover, land the chopper, and do a PNG sweep of the area, looking for the drop-off point. By this time, the chopper was drastically short of fuel. There could be no more map recce's of the area, or else they wouldn't reach the ditching point in Chile. The border option was on. Drop off on the Chilean border. Do the job from there, get out quickly, hit and run. After drop-off, no one knew exactly where they were. But by mid-afternoon, the team were already deep inside Argentina and were heading for the Rio Grande Air Base. They sent their first radio message back to Hereford, informing base that they were in enemy territory. The Eagle has landed. But by now 2,000 Argentinian Marines were searching the countryside for them. The patrol was all for carrying on with the mission, despite the huge odds stacked against them. But it was decided by the headshed that the time scale and the distance involved precluded the hit-and-run operation. Therefore, the ops room in Hereford decided to abort the mission. The patrol now went into the recovery and extraction phase.
Far from being lost and bewildered and wandering through the rugged Chilean countryside as at first thought, it now seems the British crew have been successfully spirited out of Chile. Sources talk of a top-secret operation which led to between 3 and 5 British crew from the Sea King flying out of Punta Arenas, probably on one of the daily commercial flights. Chilean investigators assure the crew deliberately destroyed the helicopter with an incendiary grenade. It seems the incident is so shrouded in secrecy that few people, except senior Chilean Air Force commanders, know the details.
Close to San Carlos, the site of the intended British landings, lay Pebble Island. Following airstrikes against Port Stanley, Argentinian aircraft had been dispersed to the Pebble Island airstrip. These included Pucara ground attack aircraft, which could have devastated the British forces as they landed. The threat had to be removed, the aircraft had to be destroyed, and the job was handed over to D Squadron.
Well, we had very sparse information, most of it supplied by overflights by fast jet. It was decided, therefore, to infiltrate a reconnaissance team by canoe, which is the way that it actually occurs. A small team was infiltrated onto the landmass adjacent and then paddled across onto Pebble Island, cached their boats and conducted a reconnaissance of the target. The team confirmed that there was settlement that was garrisoned by Argentinian forces, possibly up to 200 men, aircraft crews, maintenance crews, and 11 aircraft sitting on the airstrip uncamouflaged. So the assault team had explosives charges in standard charge form, and everybody carried their own personal weapons and as large a quantity as ammunition as they could carry. Well, we deployed from HMS Hermes, which had to come fairly close in so that the aircraft could be within range. We flew in very low level and were dropped off onto a predetermined helicopter landing site. We then moved off to conduct the assault. troop withdrew, somebody command detonated landmines. The lads received a couple of injuries. One was concussion and one lad actually got shrapnel wounds, although they were very superficial. They were helped back off the target and everybody made the rendezvous. And then we got out as quickly as possible. But I remember looking back and just seeing a sea of flame. You know, it was a great feeling. I mean, we all knew that we'd done it without loss of life and with a very minor injury. The diversionary raids were planned to create the impression that there was a large either airborne force or heliborne force arriving to take the interest away from the beach landings that were going to be conducted in San Carlos Sound. To that end, we had 4 separate targets to take on at troop level. We deployed onto unwrecked helicopter landing sites. They put us onto the ground in 4 different locations and we went off cross-country, very, very heavily laden with equipment. We got onto the targets, attacked them without any reconnaissance, and then packed up and then had the long march back to San Carlos, which we knew was going to be our final rendezvous point. Having conducted the assaults, I say all we did was deliver the firepower. We didn't even follow up to check whether we'd hit anybody or anything. You know, that was the aim of it, was just to make a big noise and get out. It was necessary for us to transfer from Hermes to the assault ships, and we deployed onto a HMS Intrepid, which was the marine carrier. And we do this by what they call cross-decking, which we got very good at. This means throwing everything on board an aircraft, getting on the aircraft, sitting on top of the kit, flying off to the next ship, unloading the aircraft, putting the stuff to bed as quickly as possible. It was like a helicopter ride. You know, you got on the helicopter, you transferred ship, you got off. You know, it was a habit. And then suddenly, literally the last lift of the squadron out was loaded with the remnants of mountain troop, squadron headquarters, and elements of G Squadron and attached personnel. Suddenly the red glow of the helicopter wasn't there anymore. That unfortunately, tragically, never made the ship and crashed into the sea. Some people actually watched it happen, which was fairly horrific. Luckily enough, though, several of the guys managed to survive that, and although the loss was horrendous, I don't believe since World War II we've ever had a loss like that in one go. And even more importantly, the hardest thing to come to terms was that it was an accident. 20 very good men went to the bottom of the sea.
The crash affected the whole regiment. Most of the lads who had assaulted the airstrip on Pebble Island went down in that chopper. There had been deaths before, but not like 20 guys all at once. It's usually 1 or 2 guys getting killed, but for 20 to be lost like that was just an unbelievable blow. No one was sure why the helicopter went down, but they think it hit an albatross. If they'd been killed in an ambush or something like that, okay, it's still a waste of life, but at least they would have died soldiering. It seemed a total waste for no apparent reason. They were good lads, and they'll never be forgotten.
We were initially sent down from Ascension to the South Atlantic to reinforce D Squadron following the tragic helicopter crash. In order to get to the South Atlantic as quickly as possible, we had to parachute into the sea off the Falklands and rendezvous with HMS Andromeda. After many hours flying, we were given the orders, action stations, standby. So we made our way to the tailgate. I was number 1 in the stick. Tailgate open, you clipped on. I could see HMS Andromeda below. Red on, green go. You launch yourself out into space and you get a severe buffeting by the slipstream of the aircraft. You plummet downwards, you can feel the jerk of the chute being deployed above you. Grab your lift webs to steer. So you have to release your equipment, which is suspended by 2 hooks around your front. You're into the sea, the chute collapses down in front of you. You have to release the canopy, and now you've got to start treading water. You've got a diver's dry suit on you. You've got to hold your hands out of the water because your fingers are exposed to the cold. Also, your head's exposed to the cold. You tread water, and you hope you'll soon be picked up by the rigid radar. I could see the lights starting to come on HMS Andromeda, and I was drifting further away. I'd been in the water now about 25 minutes. I could feel the hands going numb. I could feel the extremities of the face going numb. I rose up onto the peak of the next wave, and luckily I could see the rigid raider heading towards me, which meant that within minutes I was lifted into the boat, transported at a fast rate of knots towards HM Andromeda. As the landings began, British ships were being sunk at the rate of almost one a day. The British task force faced the probability of losing one of the aircraft carriers, Hermes or Invincible, which would have jeopardised the entire British operation to recapture the Falklands. On the 25th of May, two Argentinian Super E's approached the task force and fired two deadly Exocet missiles, sinking the Atlantic Conveyor, a ship loaded with vital supplies for the British forces. The threat to the aircraft carriers could no longer be tolerated. The mainland option was back on. A small submarine had recently arrived in San Carlos Bay. It was small enough to avoid coastal defences around the mainland of Tierra del Fuego. The mission was to travel in HMS Onyx, arrive offshore mainland Argentina, inflate rubber assault craft on the submarine casing. We would then load up all the ammunition, weapons, explosives, M202s, grenades, the full complement of war. The submarine would then submerge. We would float off and head to the beach and do a tactical landing. From the landing point, we'd make our way across country by foot to the airbase at Rio Grande. We'd set up an OP and assess the situation. We would then decide whether to bring the squadron in to do the job or whether it was feasible to do the job ourselves. We loaded all our kit and equipment aboard the submarine. We submerged and headed towards Argentina. On the way, under cover of darkness, we practiced our float-off to perfection. We arrived undetected off the coast of Tierra del Fuego and sat on the ocean floor waiting for the green light. They always say, luck shines on the brave. If you've ever been in a big battle, like I have, certain things happen to get you off the hook. Things that are unexplainable. The green light never came. The submarine commander, after 5 days on the ocean floor, received the now famous signal, "White flags are flying in Stanley." It was the 14th of June 1982. Victory.